Donald, you are the largest builder on the lower end of Manhattan. And for that, you are respected. Deal maker, comeback artist, you know how to put packages together. But there's no development on the uptown side of the same island between the same two rivers connected by the same bridges. And the fundamental question is, what are the impediments? And what incentives are required to expand the development? Or to put it another way, if one were flying 10 miles high looking down, and you saw a vast area of green, call it the downtown side of the Central Park, and the vast area of brown, but the brown or scorched area was not sand, it was topsoil. Logically, you would figure out a way to irrigate, to extend the green, because if the brown is not irrigated, when it's parched and the wind blows, it will encroach upon the green. So we have to extend the green. But so far, we've chosen to build walls between the green and the brown rather than to extend it. So in the context of this family of friends who in a real sense are looking for how to make an urban development policy real, and you are a premier developer, what impediments are there between you and developing on the other side of Central Park, and what incentives would you require to make that happen?
Well, thank you, Jesse. First of all, it's a great honor to be here with you tonight. I think maybe before we discuss impediments, I do want to say this, and I think this is very positive. It really is happening uptown. It's starting to happen. Percy, who's been a friend of mine for a long time, has done such an incredible job, both physically with money and also psychologically on really showing what can be done. And I just want to thank Percy because he was borough president. He was borough president when I was doing the Commodore Hotel, and I couldn't have done it without him. And he's just a great guy, and I love to see you, Percy. You look better than you did 20 years ago, I have to tell you. So you're doing something right. But it is happening in Uptown. And I have friends that, in this particular case, one white, looking for property in Harlem, wants to develop property in Harlem, and this is something that wasn't happening 3 years ago or 2 years ago or 10 years ago. It just wasn't happening. And, you know, sadly, one of the reasons is that it's very, very difficult to get land in other locations of Manhattan, and that's a sad reason to necessarily be going to other locations.
You said land is an impediment on the uptown side of the
well,
side.
no, land is very hard to get anywhere in Manhattan right now. And people are going to Harlem because they really see it as a new place to invest. I'm talking about the real estate developers and some very good ones in New York. And I think you're going to see a big renaissance. I think you're already seeing it. And it really was led to a large extent with what some of the work that Percy and others have done. But I think you're going to see a renaissance. And it has begun, but it's continuing in Harlem and in the uptown, as you call it.
The reason I press this case is that in spite of the accolades that Percy Sutton deserves after being borough president 12 years, he had to go to 63 banks to borrow the money to buy WLIB. This question of capital. John Johnson said to me 2 days ago, the esteemed publisher of Johnson Publishing Company, for 20 years he could not borrow any money. He had to use subscriptions to sustain the financing. So a fundamental question, while there may be some purses here and there, what is needed to break the impeding forces to pursue green lining the red line zone on the uptown side of Central Park?
Well, I just want to preface the 63 banks. I mean, I wouldn't say the banks are exactly in love with me after what I did to those suckers. I mean, you know. So, Percy, I think that you're probably doing better. I think I might have had to go to more than 63 banks. there are things that can be done, and some are being done, I don't think to the same extent. If you look, you know, I have an honor of having Jesse at 40 Wall Street. We call it the Trump Building at 40. This is now a 72-story building right on Wall Street, right opposite the New York Stock Exchange. And he's a very tough negotiator when it came to rent, I want to tell you that. This man is definitely setting a new standard for paying low rent. But it's an honor. This is the toughest negotiator I've ever had.
It's called mixed rent.
That's right. I said, come on, Jess, you got to give me something. He said, nothing. I said, all right, what the hell. So he's tough. But the fact is that that building was built with incentives, because the downtown, as we call it, the downtown market in Lower Manhattan has been given massive tax incentives for regrowth and rebirth, and it's really paid off. I mean, tremendous amounts of construction are taking place. I think that one of the things that you could do is go to the city and ask, and I really think it's important, ask for massive tax abatements for things that would be built in certain sections where you'd most like to see developed. And I will tell you that residential abatements and commercial abatements have a tremendous impact on construction. And I mean, I know all the taxes, and I know all the tax rules, laws, and changes, and I will say that the 421 program is the same program on 5th Avenue and 57th Street, which is Trump Tower, as it is for Harlem. And Harlem needs more help than does 5th Avenue and 57th Street. So I think one of the things, and really the biggest thing in terms of an economic incentive, is real estate tax abatements at a large level and larger than other sections of the city.
Let me ask you, you've done the question before. I really threw this open. The person sitting and Wellington Webb, who should be here. Again, Wellington, I keep driving the point at Donald because so I'm rather convinced that, Don, you need growth, right? You need to grow.
Not necessarily.
I asked the question to the wrong guy. How do your business requires a growth market?
Well, I guess, you know, business is a game, and we all like to play the game. And in terms of playing the game well, growth is nice, but sometimes there's something nice about sitting back and enjoying what you've done also. I could use a little bit of that.
You're already over the mountaintop, Don. You don't fit this. No, I think that the real point here is that these markets that Urban keep relating to, these markets are growing. You mentioned that there were some factors relative to the need for tax abatement. You gave me the clear impression that there are incentives on one end of Manhattan, but not on the other end. Is that true?
Well, there are incentives on all ends of Manhattan, but certain areas of Manhattan need greater incentives than others. So that 57th...
That's a very nice way to put that, Don.
Yeah. 57th Street and 5th Avenue doesn't need the same incentive as 125th Street or other areas in the city. And yet the abatement program is pretty uniform throughout the city, which would seem to put areas that need the help in a great, to a great disadvantage.
I truly believe that it has to be the partnership. The private sector is going to look at the balance sheet. There's no social services on their agenda. They respond to stockholders. But there's no reason why the government cannot provide those incentives to make those investments more lucrative in the areas in which we want to direct our
Assuming there must be a private government partnership, who will assume the leadership to make it happen?
You know, it really takes people that have the courage of a Donald Trump to know that people like Trump are not going to be intimidated. That people like Trump can decide what they think is good for America and have enough self-confidence that they're going to make it. And people like Trump will know that if the green part of Harlem and East Harlem and Washington Heights was to find itself going anywhere near Trump Tower, he'd have a problem. The idea is to have Trump's presence throughout this island and the Trumps throughout this country to provide the leadership in saying I am not involved in social services. But if you want me here the same way you're inviting me to go to South Africa, show me how I can make money, because wherever it is, I can be successful. And that also means that the Trumps are going to ask, if we come up there, what will the school system produce? What would the health system produce? What will the crime situation be? Can I make that dollar, or do I become a social scientist? And then the mayors come forward and say, we want to be your partner. We know that we can't do your job as well as you can, but we can make it easier to promise you that you will have a labor market second to none if you decide to come to our town. And that's what the empowerment zone's all about. But it is a grain of sand on the beach to talk about empowerment zones, when, as the mayor said, we don't even have an urban policy.
Well, Charlie, let me cut this another way before you probably got Donald on the spot here.
No.
The reason why I'm trying to keep Donald and his group on the spot is because when I was growing up in Greenville, South Carolina, one time there was two drunks on the railroad track drinking wine. Having big fun, the more they drank, the better they felt. When they got really in the twilight zone, one said to the other, I believe I'll buy this railroad track. Other said, don't think I want to sell it, have a drink on me. Now, Charlie, until the man or the woman who owns the railroad and the train is at the table, they just talking trash. Whether they drunk or sober, they just talking trash. It seems to me that what's missing in this equation is that those who stand to gain if there's development along the track, and lose if there's danger in the curve on the track, that they are absent in this equation. It seems that we feel the absence of Wall Street, as it were, in this equation to extend the profit zone. I'm not convinced that the guy whose strength comes from recycling his district and keeps getting reelected perpetually has an interest in developing Harlem or Denver or Chicago. On the other hand, I'm convinced that developers do. And developers have the interest in standing to get the most gain, then why can we expect of them, Donald, to take some lead, even in convening their governmental allies, to create a formula for you that makes it a profitable proposition? Why can't we expect that of you?
Well, I think we can expect it of government, and I think to a certain extent government does that. Jesse, I think they've done it in downtown Manhattan. I think they've done it in midtown Manhattan. I think they've done it to a lesser extent in the uptown sections of Manhattan.
Much lesser.
Thank you, Reverend. The entity the Reverend is referring to is the Southern Africa Enterprise Development Fund, which was established by our government, federal government, to promote private business ownership and development in the Southern Africa region. The seed capital for this enterprise fund was $100 million. And the answer to your question is we can do virtually anything. We have a great deal of discretion to invest in all kinds of activities. Many of the things that we have no comparable resources to do in places like uptown New York, Manhattan. I think that's the point you wanted to make. Now, what this fund is doing in Southern Africa is also being done through similar funds that have been established for Poland, for Hungary, and other places all over the world. So if you could move uptown Manhattan to South Africa, I could do a lot for you. Now, I must tell you that this is very confusing.
Or if we could move the the Southern African Development Formula to Harlem.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I'm saying, what formula do you have from our government to develop Southern Africa or Poland or Hungary, as the case may be, that Wellington Webb does not have in Denver or that you know cannot access in New York? What is in those formulas that would allow you to ally immediately with Trump that you can't do here now? What's in it?
Well, basically what happened was the President of the United States appointed a group of people.
How many of you?
There are now 18 of us. We started with a core group of 12 Americans. And he gave us $100 million, and he gave us discretion to decide how we wanted to organize ourselves. We created a separate corporation, and we, in effect, govern ourselves. I mean, we follow certain basic guidelines, but again, we have more flexibility in the use of federal funds than I've seen in many of the programs for urban America. The group the president pulled together was Andrew Young, who's the chair of the fund, Leon Sullivan, who led the Sullivan Principles battle in South Africa, Emma Chappelle, who's participating here. So people who had demonstrated records of success and commitment to the anti-apartheid movement in the United States that helped to cause about the democratic changes in South Africa. So he just, in effect, picked people who had solid financial backgrounds and experience, and some demonstrated knowledge and experience with the region and with South Africa. And he said, you guys figure out how to get this done. This is a general mandate.
Before the next speaker comes from the floor over here, I do want to express thanks to you, Donald Trump, for being with us tonight. We need your building skills, your gusto, your rent package for people on Wall Street who represent diversity. And we thank you for coming tonight. Let's give Donald Trump a big hand. A big hand for Donald Trump. Hey, Donald.